Hey everybody, welcome back. How's it going? So, since I didn't do a video last week, this video will be more or less covering the past 2 weeks. So as far as what I did this past 2 weeks, apart from making some small improvements to the devlog, and I started an Instagram account for the game, so follow Taiji game on Instagram. I've more or less been working on the art gallery area still, so I finished up detailing the interior, and then I had to do the lighting for the interior because I have like this kind of funky lighting setup. And if you just look at the actual image map, it looks pretty psychedelic and weird. But if I split out those channels, you can see that there's really just like a front lighting and a rear lighting, and then like an interior lighting channel for everything. So it's really more simple than it seems like, but those are just kind of packed together for efficiency purposes and all that into one texture on the red, green, and blue channels. Excuse me. So this week in particular, I've actually been taking those assets that I did for the artwork for the art gallery area and starting to put that into the game, which is a little bit more complicated than it kind of seems like it might be. You'd think maybe it would be pretty straightforward, but there's a little bit more that has to happen to make that work. And you have to be careful in terms of like lining things up and making sure everything like sorts correctly and works correctly. I still have to do the collision, and I have to set up like all the triggers so that as the player goes through there, it fades in and out the different floors and all that. But it's kind of nice to see that finally starting to come together in some kind of capacity. And with that, it is time for topic of the week. So this week I'm going to do something that's a little bit more of a technical discussion about how something is implemented in the game. And so it might be kind of hard to follow for people who don't do a lot of game development or just don't know a lot about how stuff technically is implemented in games. I'll try to make it understandable to the average person, but, if you kind of get lost in everything, just, lie back and think of England. Not that. Just think about world peace. Okay, let's just forget about that. Let's move on. So, on the stream this week, I got asked a little bit of a question about how the sorting works in the game. And I actually realized that I've accumulated all of this over years' knowledge of how you can do this type of game in Unity. And in spite of the fact that the way that I'm doing it is more or less like the Unity way that you would do like a top-down 2D game, it still took me like 2 years or something and talking to some tech support person from Unity to actually figure some of this stuff out. So let's see if I can kind of boil down some of that knowledge into something that's a little bit easier to understand, or maybe just kind of puts it into a frame that somebody could learn something from. So the thing that I got asked about was, again, sorting. So by sorting, I just mean kind of how you determine which objects should be drawn in front of which other objects in the game, and vice versa, right? So it's just which things get drawn on top of each other. So at a baseline in Unity, that type of thing is pretty simple. So we're going to do a little bit of an example. So let's just like take this rock here. So at a baseline, like this rock is getting drawn on top of like the grass here and on top of the player, I guess. Well, it goes behind the tree and whatever. So the way this works in Unity in general is that you have a sprite renderer component, and that sprite renderer component has a sorting layer associated with it. In my case, I just use different sorting layers for the different areas in the game. And then there's like a few special things. And then it has an order in that layer. So objects generally sort by these two aspects. So they sort by, on this list, if it's higher on the list, it gets drawn first. And if it's lower on the list, it gets drawn later. And then as far as the order in layer, if it's a lower number or a negative number, it gets drawn first. And then if it's a higher number, it gets drawn later. So, for example, if I wanted this to be drawn on top of this other rock, I could change this order in layer to be higher. And now you can see that that gets drawn on there. Or if I wanted it to get drawn like further back behind this grass, I can change the order in layer back there. So that type of sorting where you just put things in front of or behind other things actually might work for a lot of games, particularly like side-scrolling games where something's pretty much either in front of your player character or behind them, and things don't really move around in terms of the depth that much. But for like a top-down game, a situation that you're going to run into pretty quickly is that you have something like here where I have this tree that the player, needs to be able to go around and also be in front of. So they can be in front of it or they can walk around it and be behind it, right? So that is a little bit of a tricky situation to resolve. But actually the way in Unity that is kind of the prescribed way that you do that is as far as those sorting layers and order in layer that I mentioned earlier, if you set those to be the same for two different objects. So let me just do that let me pick something besides this rock. Let's pick like a bush or something. Let's pick like a smaller bush. So if I have this bush here and these are at the same layer, you'll see here that it's sorting based on the y-axis. Now this isn't actually the default behavior. The default behavior would be to sort based on depth. So that would be how far away it is from the camera or also the z-axis. So you have to kind of do a little bit of tweaking to get that to work. So the way you would do that is under your project settings and under your graphics settings, you need to change this transparency sort mode to custom axis, and then you can put in whatever axis you might want that to be. In this case, I put 1 on the y-axis because I want to sort positively on the y-axis. So this means things that are further down on the screen get drawn later, and things that are higher up get drawn earlier. So that only happens if two objects are on the same sorting layer and on the same order in the layer. So for example, if I put this at a higher, like -1 instead of -2, then it's always going to draw in front of this other bush. So it has to be at the same exact number for that sorting rule to apply. Otherwise, it's purely just based on sorting layer and order in layer. It's just when they're the same, that's how it applies. So in general for the game, the way I do it is that the player is on, they're on their sorting layer, essentially. And then any objects that I want, like trees for you to go behind, happen to be at that same sorting layer. So objects, in this case, sort based on their pivot point. I say pivot point because there's two different kind of ways that you can sort objects. You can either sort based on their center, which you'll see that this little gizmo here changes position when I toggle this, and that those are different positions, or they can sort by the pivot point. So this would be the pivot point, and then that's the center. The pivot point is something that you actually just manually specify in the sprite itself. So when you actually are like editing your sprites, you would go in there and you can, well, it doesn't actually let me edit it in edit mode. So let me go out of play mode and then I can actually edit this. Okay, so you see this little blue dot here. That's actually your pivot point. So you can set that to where you would want, if an object was past this point vertically, this would now be in front of that instead of behind it. So anyway, that's pretty important actually as far as a detail of trying to get things to sort correctly. This is all pretty rambly about trying to explain this, but there's like a million different details, and I haven't even gotten into like the further detail of like, what if you have a bridge that the player can walk under and then go up some stairs and then walk over it? That's a whole nother level of detail for that. But I think that I've kind of covered the basics of how this type of sorting setup works. And if anybody has any questions, you can leave them in the comments below. If you did actually like the video and you got something out of it, let me know, and like the video. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a Instagram now for Taiji. So it's Taiji Game on Instagram, and as always, it's also Taiji Game on Twitter, and Wishlist the Game on Steam. There is a link in the description about that. Also, I'm going to put up at the end card for this a link to the video talking about what Taiji is if you don't have any idea what this game is. Anyway, I think that pretty much covers it. You can follow me on Twitter also at mvaindiemender, but I probably wouldn't advise that. I will see you all around next week, I think. Although I'm starting to think that maybe I should do these on a bi-weekly basis, because doing them every week, I end up with not really a lot that I've actually done on the game each week, unless it's like a really weird week or something. In any case, I will see you all around next time. Have a good one, everybody.